Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session, spring session, of the LSE Global South Dialogue. I'm Gregory Chin, and the co-lead of the LSE Global South Dialogue with Dr. Alvaro Mendez. I'm a professor of political science, political economy at York University in Canada, and an associate of LSE Ideas, our host today. Our topic today is Latin America and BRICS Plus, interests, risks, and geopolitical dilemmas. And our speaker is Professor Cynthia Quiliconi, who I will introduce shortly. I will also introduce our moderator today, Dr. Alvaro Mendez. Before I introduce Professor Quiliconi, let me also note that the next Global South Dialogue, the third session, is already scheduled for Wednesday, October 15 in the autumn. And it will be on the Global South in the age of Trump, and will feature Dr. Rohan Mukherjee, Professor of International Relations and Deputy Director of LSE Ideas at the LSE, and the author of the very important book, Ascending Order, Rising Powers and the Politics of Status in International Institutions, Cambridge University Press. Let us turn now today to Latin America and BRICS Plus, interests, risks, and geopolitical dilemmas. And we are very fortunate to have our speaker today, Professor Quiliconi. Cynthia Quiliconi is a full professor and dean of the Department of International Studies and Communication at the Latin American School of Social Sciences, Ecuador, and senior editor of the Oxford University Encyclopedia of International Studies. She previously served as vice rector of Flaxo, Ecuador, and president of the International Studies Association's Latin American and Caribbean Regional Group. She has served as advisor to the Secretariat of Industry and the Secretariat of Agriculture in Argentina. Her research and publications focus on international political economy from the Global South perspective, BRICS and development, regionalism in Latin America, and trade negotiations. Her recent works include China's deployment in Latin America, debates from Latin American international political economy, a book, and Latin American international political economy, contributions beyond the transatlantic divide. And she edited and was a contributor in the edited book, Global and Regional Leadership of BRICS Countries in 2015. Welcome, Cynthia, today. I'll just take a moment also to introduce Alvaro Mendez, who we're very fortunate to have with us today. Dr. Alvaro Mendez will serve as our moderator today and respond to Cynthia's presentation. Alvaro Mendez has deep expertise on Latin America and Asia, including how the new Southern China-backed or BRICS-led multilateral development banks, the EIB and the NDB, have become increasingly involved in Latin America. Dr. Mendez is the director of the Global South Unit at the London School of Economics and Political Science and a senior associate at LSE Ideas. Professor Mendez is also an associate fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy and a member of the Columbia Council of Foreign Affairs. He teaches at the LSE, Sciences Po, and Fudan University in Shanghai. He has won numerous teaching awards, including at the LSE, and has contributed to numerous books as an author, co-author, editor, and has published in numerous peer-reviewed articles in journals, distinguished journals such as Geopolitics, Global Policy, Asian Business and Management, Sustainability, the China Journal, Asia Pacific Business Review. Thank you to you both. Cynthia, it's great timing to have this conversation today. Brazil will host the BRICS Summit coming up in July. China hosted a number of the leaders from Latin American, Caribbean countries yesterday in Shanghai and Beijing, including President Lula. They signed many of agreements. So it's wonderful timing for our conversation today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on the different time schedules in which everybody is first, I would like to thank Alvaro Mendez and Professor Gregory Chin also for the invitation to speak at the Global South Unit of the London School of Economics. Yeah, this is great time. I think when we schedule, at least when we schedule this conversation, I wasn't aware this was going to overlap with the CELAC China summit. I wasn't aware when we decided on the date. But yeah, I think it's a great time to discuss about these issues. So today I want to reflect on a pressing and increasingly relevant topic, the engagement of Latin American countries with BRICS Plus. But also, when I was preparing this presentation, I realized that we also have to talk a little bit about the engagement of certain Latin American countries about with the new development bank. We are living through a moment of significant transformation in the global order in general and the global south in particularly, and the expansion of the BRICS blocks into BRICS Plus, particularly in the past year, marks a clear attempt to reshape the structure of global governance and move towards a multipolar configuration. I would say that for Latin America, a region historically embedded within the Western liberal order, this possesses both opportunities and dilemmas, and that is part of the title we have discussed with Gregory and with Alvaro. So first, I would like to begin outlining briefly the nature of BRICS, born from the original BRICS countries, and we all know it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This group has recently expanded its configuration to include as full members countries like Indonesia, Iran, Egypt, United Arab States, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia. This group has been designed to amplify the voice of the Global South. It criticizes, as we all know, the dominance of G7 institutions and promote alternative frameworks for cooperation, finance, and diplomacy. BRICS Plus have recently incorporated 9 more countries as partners: Bolivia, Belarus, Cuba, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Thailand, Uganda, and Uzbekistan. These new memberships are both a geopolitical signal and an institutional experiment in building a non-Western coalition. So I would like to divide my presentation addressing 3 main points that the title already encompasses: interests of Latin American countries that have already joined BRICS Plus, and I will discuss Cuba and Bolivia, and also interests of prospects countries in the region to be closer to BRICS, but not with applications of being BRICS Plus members, but applications to be part of the new development. And we have 2 interesting cases there, Colombia and Uruguay. In the second part of my talk, I would discuss the risk that from my point of view are related to dimensions at the international and domestic level. And finally, I would like to close my presentations discussing geopolitical challenges related to the strategic dispute between the U.S. and China and Latin America that, as we all know, has intensified very recently with the new administration, or the 2.0 Trump administration. So in terms of interest, I would say that Latin America's role within BRICS framework is particularly intriguing. On one hand, the region holds significant strategic assets, critical minerals, vast energy reserves, and biodiversity. It also has human capital, urbanization, and a long tradition of multilateral diplomacy. On the other hand, the countries in Latin America differ sharply in terms of their foreign policy orientations, economic models, and domestic political and economic landscapes. This divergence shapes how each government perceives and engages with BRICS Plus and the new development. So to start, I will discuss Bolivia. Bolivia is a developing left-leaning economic model whose economy is based on the exploitation of natural resources. The country is rich in hydrocarbons, primarily natural gas, and holds the world's largest lithium exploitable deposits, estimated at over 21 million tons. While the export of Bolivian hydrocarbons, mainly to neighboring countries like Brazil and Argentina, remains a traditional revenue source, the lithium industry is a relatively recent addition to the country's foreign economic priorities. Lithium nationalization in 2008 gave a start to the development of Bolivia's deposits, but for several reasons, which include difficulties in attracting investments, lack of technological infrastructure, opposition from indigenous communities and local environmental organizations, full-scale exploitation of deposits has never been launched, aside from a few pilot projects that I will discuss in a few moments. So it was only in 2021 that two Chinese companies and a Russian company won the development tender of lithium exploitation. The contracts were valued approximately at $2 billion and include a $970 million deal signed last September with a Russian company, Uranium One Group, and a $1 billion agreement with Chinese companies, CBC and CITIC One Group. Both companies seek to build lithium processing plants capable of producing tens of thousands of tons per year of lithium. However, Bolivia, we know, is facing a growing political backlash over those contracts, with community groups arguing that the agreements offer no real benefits to local residents. The controversy led Bolivia's Chamber of Deputies to suspend parliamentary discussions on the agreements in this February 2025, pending the completion of a thorough information sharing process with civil society. President Luis Arce has accused lawmakers of deliberately obstructing these investments as part of a broader political strategy against his administration. In this sense, the statement by Bolivian authorities declaring that the country would like to become a strategic partner of the BRICS are related to the interest to ensure the diversification of its export supply of lithium, hydrocarbons, and agricultural products, and to increase the pace of industrial construction. In fact, Bolivia has also signed the BRI in 2018, and given the vast scale of its national reserves, the Bolivian government is keen to expand its pool of international investors. BRICS countries already dominate Bolivia's foreign economic relations, and I think this is an important point to highlight. Its main exports in 2024 were zinc, silver, and natural gas, and the main destinations for its export were Brazil is the first trade partner, and China is the second trade partner. Also, we find India in the 8th place as a trade partner, which is a major important of Bolivian goal. So beyond trade, China is also an active investor in Bolivian infrastructure and technology projects. Cooperation with Russia is growing more important for Bolivia. The lithium agreement is part of a broader strategy. For example, in the sidelines of the Kazan summit, Presidents Arce and Putin held a bilateral meeting to discuss joint nuclear technologies. Bolivia has recently opened a unique high-altitude El Alto Nuclear Research and Technology Center designed for peaceful nuclear applications built by Russian experts. At the same time, the complex political situation in Bolivia and the conditions in which the country finds itself by the 2025 general elections cannot be ignored. The dispute over the presidential candidacy between the former President Evo Morales and the incumbent President Luis Arce threatens to undo the political project that has been unfolding in the country since 2006. It is noteworthy that yesterday President Arce has resigned to run for re-election, so that might solve some of the problems in terms of the candidacies. Nonetheless, social divisions and an economic crisis are fueling deep uncertainty and pessimism in Bolivian society about the country's development outlook. BRICS, or the insertion in BRICS Plus, could be a new opportunity for economic cooperation if the current course is maintained after the elections. However, if opposition forces come to power, Bolivia may well follow the path of Argentina, which abandoned plans to join the bloc after a change of government. In terms of Cuba, for Cuba, international support from BRICS countries means a chance to overcome its long-standing and multifaceted crisis. Cuba sees as its primary objectives joining BRICS Plus to counter U.S. unilateral restrictive measures and sanctions and to seek alternative sources of financing. While Cuba maintains trade relations with all BRICS countries, their share in the total trade is modest. China is the top trading partner among BRICS members, accounting for about 13% of Cuba's foreign trade. Trade between the two countries saw its biggest growth between 2005 and 2015, but in recent years, there has been a decline in Cuban-Chinese interaction. Although Cuba joined the BRI in 2018, and meaningful results have yet to materialize. Latin American countries account for 1/3 of Cuban foreign trade, with Brazil representing just 3.2%. So the expansion of trade and economic relations with China, with Russia, has pushed its share on Cuba's trade to 7%, strengthening foreign relations, but those relations with BRICS countries have still yet to materialize. It should be noted that Cuba's participations in the BRICS Plus could be beneficial for several reasons. First, about Cuba's geostrategic position, which allows certain projections over the Caribbean and Central America, as well as access to some of the world's largest nickel and cobalt reserves. However, the socioeconomic situation on the island remains critical nowadays. Cuba experiences the worst economic crisis in the last 30 years. According to recent data, more than 80% of the island population lives in poverty, and inflation has reached record levels. There is a food crisis, and power outages are occurring at this moment. So the pressure of U.S. sanctions is strong, and aid from China, Russia, and other Havana partners is insufficient to mitigate the negative consequences of the crisis. The country faces an energy crisis, as I said, and that energy crisis is related with the political instability in Venezuela, which previously supplied oil to the island at preferential prices. Therefore, considering the prospect for Cuba's memberships in BRICS Plus will only be positive after a clear and effective plan developed to provide humanitarian and economic assistance to Cuba, which hopefully will overcome the deep socioeconomic crisis and organize the exploitations of Cuba's extractive industries. So other countries, and I don't want to spend much time on them, but we know that other countries have asked to join BRICS Plus in the region, Venezuela and Nicaragua. But we also know that Brazil has vetoed their entrance for political reasons. Argentina, we also know that, has asked to join BRICS Plus, has been admitted, but then we know with the change in government, President Milei has decided to withdraw its participation in the BRICS Plus due to political reasons. But I would like to move to discuss two countries that are not part of BRICS Plus or has not applied to be part of BRICS Plus, but have asked to join the New Development Bank. The first one is Uruguay, and Álvaro has written extensively about that case, very interesting paper. So Uruguay has asked accession to the New Development Bank in 2021, and its entry was approved by the Board of Governors the same year, although its formalization didn't actually occur due to the Lacachepo administration's failure to comply with internal processes. However, when Yamandu Orsi just arrived to the Uruguayan government, when he assumed the presidency of Uruguay in March this year, his administration already expressed interest in moving forward with New Development Bank membership, considering access to financing for infrastructure projects, education, healthcare, and digital development. Although the accession process still requires parliamentary ratification, it is expected that under the new government, the necessary steps will be completed to formalize Uruguay's New Development Bank membership. It is important to note that Uruguay has no current plans to join BRICS Plus. Its focus is on participation in the NDB as a way to diversify its sources of development finances. Uruguay interest reflects a commitment to diversified international economic alliances, although Uruguay maintains a close relations with the United States, Europe, and the Mercosur countries. So joining the NDB would allow Uruguay to deepen its ties with large emerging economies. This geoeconomic diversification seeks to mitigate risk arising from excessive concentration in traditional markets, especially in a context of growing global trade tensions and economic fragmentation. We know that China is the main Uruguay trade partner. 24% of their trade exports goes to China, followed by Brazil 18%, the EU 14%, US 9%, and Argentina 5%. Furthermore, Uruguay's approach to the new development bank is part of a strategy to reaffirm its pragmatic and multilateralist foreign policy profile. The country has historically sought to maintain balanced diplomacy, promoting active non-alignment and prioritizing access to multiple international forums. By joining the ANDB, Uruguay strengthens its position as an actor willing to participate in initiatives from both Global North and Global South, preserving its strategic autonomy and its credibility as a reliable partner in various international blocs. On the other hand, at the regional level, Uruguay's entry into the new development bank can also be interpreted as a sign of a search for alternatives to the limitations of Mercosur that so far has prevented Uruguay to sign a free trade agreement with China, because Mercosur regulations establish that countries that are part of Mercosur can only conduct external negotiations as a bloc. But also means that two countries that are part of Mercosur will be members of the NDB. Given the difficulties in stimulating intra-regional trade and the lack of robust regional financing mechanisms, the NDB appears to be a viable option for accessing multilateral funds to support logistics or energy integration projects with its other Latin American. Membership in the NDB allows, as Alvaro has pointed out in a paper about Uruguay's accession to the NDB, the possibility of a more flexible agency where collaborations between Brazil and Uruguay advance an agenda inspired by the Development Bank of Latin America, known as CAF, that has inspired the NDB model. In fact, the NDB enlargement has been promoted by Brazil despite objections from Russia and India. The first enlargement that added Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Uruguay is still under completion, and we have to still ponder the results about this. Finally, I would like to discuss, in terms of interest, Colombia. I think Colombia is a very interesting case. We have seen what has happened in the past days with Colombia. I think that's a very important shift in terms of foreign policy, and a critical shift in terms of foreign policy that took place, I would say, started to be in Petro's thought for a while, but took place a month ago when Colombia policymakers requested to join the BRICS New Development Bank. Colombia have approached BRICS with caution, while President Petro's administration has expressed interest in diversifying international partnerships and attracting new sources of investment and infrastructure development. It remains careful not to jeopardize Colombia's long-standing and structural ties with the United States, which remains its top security ally and economic partner in the hemisphere. For Bogota, potential collaborations with BRICS serves as a way to expand its strategic options without committing to a full realignment. Consequently, Colombia's primary interest lies in leveraging economic and trade opportunities with emerging powers while preserving the financial and political support it was receiving from Western aligned institutions. As it is widely known, Colombia has traditionally been a strong US ally, but recently, President Petro experienced various misunderstandings with Trump administration, who has accused Petro of being a friend of the organized crime organization Tren de Aragua, and in January experienced a diplomatic incident when Petro banned 2 US airplanes repatriating several immigrants from landing in Colombia. So Trump, in turn, announced the imposition of 25% tariff to Colombia as retaliation for that decision. The joint declaration by the President of Brazil and Colombia, signed after their meeting in Bogota in April 2024, reflected the expansion of the Colombian-Brazilian contacts and the transition of their bilateral relations. Brazil and Colombia intend to jointly promote the environmental agenda. In regional and international organizations, Brazil has declared its willingness to support the Colombian candidate for the Secretary General of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. Both countries agreed to continue working to improve logistics connectivity in South America. And the main objective of that connectivity would be to increase transport connectivity along the Atlantic and the Pacific coast. U.S. is still the main trading partner for Colombia. 29% of their exports, they go to the U.S., 10% to the EU, 8% to Panama, 6% to China, and 4% to Brazil, which reflects the lack of importance in terms of trade of BRICS countries for the Colombian case. But there is also a rapprochement between Colombia and China. In October 2023, during Petro's visit to Beijing, China and Colombia signed 12 documents on bilateral cooperation. And at the current moment, President Petro is in China for the China Select meeting, as we have discussed in a few moments ago. In fact, Colombia is right now negotiating the memorandum of agreement to join the BRI and has officially asked to join the New Development Bank. I would say that for Colombia, that this is a historical movement that could erode the strategic and security cooperation with Washington, including military aid, intelligence sharing, and trade preferences. And in addition, Colombia's political elites and population are highly polarized. So membership could intensify internal divisions with conservative sectors fiercely opposing alignment with China and Russia-led initiatives. FDI from the US, Canada, and the EU, which are major investors in Colombia's different sectors, could slow down or reroute due to concerns about geopolitical risk exposure. Despite criticism, the Petro administration maintains that joining the NDB does not imply a withdrawal from traditional partners, but rather an expansion of options for the country's economic and social development. In terms of the strategic benefits of Latin American countries joining BRICS or IDB, that would be first, access to alternative financing that is vital in a moment of constricted credit and fiscal pressures. Second, partnerships through BRICS Plus open doors for cooperation in energy, infrastructure, digital technologies, and health. And third, BRICS Plus membership can be seen as a vehicle to reassert sovereignty and policy autonomy, a long-standing ambition in Latin American political thought. So second, I would like to discuss risks. First, I think that both Uruguay and Colombia are trying to avoid major risk, and they can act as what the IR literature calls the figure of connector states. Countries of the global south that present a balanced geopolitical position and within the framework of the arrangements of trade and investment flows triangulate trade, investment, cooperation between geopolitical distant actors. This way, they can exercise hedging in their foreign policy that represents a combination of balancing and alignment options that states combine to mitigate risk and maximize opportunities with a clear pragmatic approach. Hedging actions are pursued by developing strong relationships with both global powers and thinking to keep alternative avenues open in the face of hegemonic competition, with measures such as avoiding regional alignments, adopting balancing or mirroring strategies to counteract risk. This type of foreign policy has also been defined in the literature. We all, the colleagues that they work on Latin American issues as active non-alignment, the work of 14, Haney and Nominami, multi-alignment, Klingbeil, and economic pragmatism, Bloomfield, which are distinct expressions of the range of options of hedging. In this sense, it makes sense that Uruguay and Colombia have asked to join NDB instead of BRICS Plus. The NDB is perceived as a more technical entity. It is a development finance institution instead of political alliance. There is a more problematic alignment perceptions about BRICS Plus as a direct challenge to the Western-led liberal order. Latin American countries joining could provoke political and economic retaliation from the US. It is not so costly for countries like Bolivia and Cuba that don't have important trade relations with the US, but can be more costly for Uruguay and Colombia that still have important trade and cooperation ties with Europe and the US and pursue a more balanced foreign policy. Latin American countries also face domestic political risk by joining BRICS Plus. Joining could become a domestic political weapon, as opposition parties might frame it as siding with authoritarian powers, particularly during election cycles. In this sense, Brazil is exercising also hedging, as we have seen in the past weeks. During its 2025 BRICS presidency, Brazil will likely use the group to craft a multi-aligned strategy in the face of Trump's return to the White House and intensified U.S. China competition. While Brazil was unable to stop BRICS expansion, which it has long opposed, it is still trying to prevent the group from moving in a more anti-Western direction, which could complicate Brazil's ongoing important ties with the United States. It is clear that President Lula has been exercising a balancing act last week, given that the US is the main buyer of Brazilian steel and is trying to negotiate with European countries the approval of the Mercosur-EU agreement. We can also expect that President Lula in the BRICS summits will seek to emphasize less controversial topics where Brazil has the potential to be a leader on the global stage, such as food security and the green transition. The result of the current trip of President Lula to Russia first and to China second to attend the Select China Summit has borne important fruit for Brazil and for the region, but particularly for Brazil, we have promises to invest $1 billion in green aviation fuel productions and the construction of an innovation center of clean energy in wind and hydrogen energy in Piauí in the northeast of Brazil. Brazil is also the host of the next COP meeting in Belém, so these announcements reinforce his leadership as a leader in the green transition. Moreover, the Brazil agribusiness is ready to fill the vacuum left by the US exports to China, but still will have to wait with the current relaxation of the trade war that was agreed yesterday. So Itamaraty has been criticized, the meaning of the visit to Russia. Part of Itamaraty has criticized that due to the historical position of Brazil as a neutral state on wars, particularly because Lula has never been to Ukraine since the war began. However, it is clear that Brazil is also exercising hedging in terms of membership with its veto for Venezuela and Nicaragua to join BRICS Plus. That shows that Brazil also hopes the new additions from the region will respect democratic values and a more balanced profile that sees BRICS as an instrument for cooperation, but not for confrontation. Yesterday, as we were discussing at the beginning, Lula, Petro, and Boric attended the CELAC China Forum, a forum that is conducted usually at the ministerial level. I think that is a clear gesture that looks to deepen cooperation. Xi Jinping has replied that gesture, promising a closer relationship between Latin American countries and China and investments in the region for more than $9 billion. In terms, I would say that Argentina, it's a good example of another type of risks. After expressing interest in joining BRICS Plus and the new development bank, the new government under the Milei administration has reversed course, citing ideological and economic concerns. This sharp policy reversal illustrates how domestic political transitions in Latin America can have outside effects on international commitments. A similar situation can take place in other Latin American countries. In order for BRICS to continue its march in Latin America, we need certain ideological convergence in the region and leadership by middle powers that can exercise hedging strategies. Finally, in terms of geopolitical challenges, from my point of view, Trump erraticism is the main challenge for countries that are trying to cooperate with BRICS. Any efforts to persuade Latin Americans to push China back are hampered by the Trump administration all-stick, no-carrot approach. Deportations, tariffs, and threats dominate Trump's foreign policy towards the region. Stronger trade and economic ties would make it much easier for Trump's team to persuade particularly South Americans to distance themselves from China and BRICS. Yet the administration has shown little interest in those type of measures. Latin American countries involved in BRICS seek economic diversification and greater strategic autonomy. The region's dependence on traditional financial institutions such as IMF, World Bank, and Western capital markets has historically subjected its pro-cyclical lending and political conditionalities. As many Latin American countries are facing important constraints, the possibility of joining BRICS Plus and joining the new development bank present a symbolic and practical alternative. However, despite its promise, the new development bank remains small compared to the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank. Its cumulative lending remains below 40 billion globally, and only a fraction of that has reached Brazil. Additionally, the new development bank has struggled to expand membership from non-BRICS countries, and its portfolio has not yet demonstrated the capacity to finance larger-scale transformational infrastructure. Thus, Latin American countries, they still need traditional development financing. Another big geopolitical challenge is the growing asymmetry in the BRICS Plus structure, particularly the dominance of China. Latin American economies could deepen their dependency on Chinese trade and finance with limited space or room to maneuver to negotiate terms. While China provides capital and infrastructure, it also tends to favor bilateral relations over multilateral diplomacy, which may reduce the bargaining powers of Latin American countries within the bloc. This goes hand in hand with increasing regional fragmentation that Latin America experiences, both within the region, which lacks a coherent common position, and across the global south, where diverse national interests can stall deeper integration. Not all BRICS Plus members share the same vision of the world order. Some prioritize economic development, others focus on anti-Western rhetoric, and a few aim to secure strategic resources. An epochal change is underway, and the pivot of economic activity has shifted from the North Atlantic to the Asia-Pacific. This shift is the broader geopolitical context in which the idea of BRICS was approved. Leading states of the global south felt a need to create alternative institutions to voice their concerns and tackle issues of collective interest. BRICS was conceptualized to carry forward this sentiment. It didn't intend to subvert existing institutions, rather, it was meant to complement them. The declaration of the first BRICS summit explicitly recognized the centrality of the G20 in reviving the global economy and the role of the UN in maintaining peace. The other challenge that Latin America is facing is that the US and the EU remain deeply influential. In this sense, the region is still a key zone in the broader competition between the US and China. Latin American countries risk being caught in a geopolitical tug of war, especially if engagement with BRICS Plus or the NDB are perceived as a pivot away from the West. The US may interpret closer ties with China and Russia as a threat to its sphere of influence in the hemisphere, potentially leading to diplomatic or economic repercussions. We have seen what has happened with Panama in the past few months, which was almost forced to leave the BRI and also to accept the presence of the US within the channel. Additionally, the normative dimension of BRICS Plus, I would say, is still ambiguous. Unlike the EU, which has explicit commitments to human rights and democratic norms, BRICS Plus emphasizes sovereignty, non-interference, and development. While this appeals to some governments, it also raises concerns about the political erosion of accountability and transparency in international cooperation. For Latin America, a region that has experienced democratic backsliding and growing authoritarian tendencies, this normative ambiguity could reinforce negative trends if not carefully managed. In conclusion, Latin America engagements with BRICS Plus or NDB reflects a search for strategic diversification, financial alternatives, and a greater voice and agency for the global south with autonomy. However, this path is tense and is with risk of fragmentation, dependency, and geopolitical backlash. Whether BRICS Plus and the NDB become a meaningful counterweight will depend on the coherence of its vision and the agency of its members. And I think Brazil has a key role to play in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. That's a great presentation. You gave us both a lot of IPE breadth and comparative political economy depth, examining both BRICS and NDB and how various Latin American countries, Caribbean countries are considering joining or not joining, impacts. And given Alvaro's expertise, deep expertise, I'm going to hand over very quickly to Alvaro to respond to your excellent presentation, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your
And
great
Alvaro,
presentation.
just before, could I just
Yeah, of
encourage the
course.
audience to forward their questions for our question and answer that will follow after Alvaro. Thank you, Alvaro. The
Excellent.
floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, Greg, for chairing the event. And I want to thank the attendees of this particular event, which we didn't really realize when we booked it, that it was actually after the select meeting, but it coincided to be the case. And I think it's a very interesting discussion. Thank you for offering your very useful points, which are very important because there is a lot of clarity in what BRICS actually is. Well, first of all, BRICS is not an IGO. It's not an international organization. So when people or countries talk about membership, you cannot be a member of something that is not constituted as an IGO. In fact, the BRICS do not have a secretariat. So when we look at the BRICS, people like Greg and myself, we focus a lot on the New Development Bank because it's an actual institution that you can actually analyze properly. I think because Latin America hears about all these different initiatives, I think there is a tendency to confuse what these organizations are in reality. You have to realize that you have 33 countries in the region. It's not one single actor, but 33, 26 which have diplomatic ties with China and the other ones with Taiwan, which, by the way, makes Latin America very interesting in terms of geopolitics, because Latin America has the largest region in the world with countries still having diplomatic ties with Taipei. 7 of the 12 countries, including the Vatican, are from Latin America. So it's pretty interesting that the 7 still in Latin America, and some of them, of course, are being challenged by that to come to mind, but I will discuss that when we talk about geopolitics. So there is a lack of understanding of what the BRICS is, and I oftentimes hear people confusing the BRICS with the BRI, or the BRI with the AIB, and so on, and the NDB. I mean, the BRICS and the NDB have a natural connection, of course. The NDB is nicknamed the BRICS Development Bank. It's an institution that actually exists physically and also legally as an entity. It was pushed forward in 2013 initially by President Xi Jinping, but it was created officially and legally in Brazil in 2014 in Fortaleza. So Brazil always has had an important place in the New Development Bank, which is based in Shanghai, by the way. And since the presidency of the Brazilians started, the NDB started expanding, and as Cynthia rightly stated, it's not just the founding members any longer. Now it also includes Egypt, Bangladesh, and the UAE. These 3 countries have completed their full membership as additional members. Uruguay has completed all the processes. It has been approved. But the completion of their membership didn't came about. We were expecting it to happen. This took place before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I think there was a little bit of sense, what are we going to do with the BRICS now that Russia is such a prominent member? The NDB acted quickly in terms of putting new operations on hold in Russia. But of course, part of the problem that countries that are thinking of the NDB is that the NDB is now going to be in the hands of the Russians for the next 5 years, of the Brazilians. Interestingly so, it will be NDB in the hands of the Russians, handled by a Brazilian, because former President Dilma Rousseff will stay actually as the president of the NDB while it is in the hands of the Russians. So it's interesting because it will be the NDB based in Shanghai, Russian presidency, yet with a Brazilian face. So that would be interesting. So I think there is lack of clarity on that. And that lack of clarity on what the BRICS is oftentimes leads to countries in the region not knowing what to do and how to interact with them. I have spoken with numerous policymakers, and I remember in one case someone thinking that the B on BRI meant bank. And I had to explain to that person that it was actually not the case, that there are 2 banks that figure prominently there, the NDB and the BRI. I'm sorry, the NDB and the AIB. So there is lack of clarity on that. You made very good points about Bolivia and Cuba. I think this is very, very symbolically for them politically. I think the issue with the BRICS Plus is largely on the ideological side. The NDB is again is a multilateral development bank. They do not produce a lot of funding in terms of loans themselves, but what they do is they serve as catalyzer to bring more money for infrastructure when needed. So that's an important element of that. And of course, Uruguay has completed the process. President Orsi's new Minister of the Economy has expressed, and the government in general, I think, will move forward with that membership. And I think partly because Uruguay also is looking a closer agenda with China. As Cynthia mentioned, that the Uruguayans have been discussing an FTA with China, which goes beyond what Mercosur countries would want Uruguay to do, but they still see China as an important partner, and therefore they're still going ahead with that, and that shows pragmatism. Cynthia mentioned Colombia. I think Colombia is lost in translation here big time. Despite the 2 visits of President Petro to China, Colombia has never been a Pacific country, despite of being the only country in South America with access to the Pacific and the Atlantic in South America. Colombia has always been looking up to the Atlantic, which is very unfortunate. I think the maneuver now, but Petro is mostly political, I think, to challenge Trump, not at an ideal time. Endorsing the BRI has been done by many countries in the region. In fact, without counting Panama, we have 21 countries that have endorsed the BRI. If we count Colombia, now we have 22 again. It's probably not the ideal time to endorse it because, of course, it would attract a lot of attention from Washington, and Colombia, given the prominent position they have had with the U.S., should be very careful about that. I've written extensively on this, and I have argued that countries in the region do not need to think that all the roads lead to Washington or Beijing. I think they need to think of a multi-basket approach, multi-vector foreign policy and foreign policy strategy, and I think this is problematic. But I think the idea of Colombia joining the NDB would be good if this is really what the Colombians are looking for. There is a whole process that needs to be followed. It's not by invitation, like perhaps Petro might think it is. You have to follow a process. You have to actually pay in capital. And the membership will have to be formalized and legalized under Colombian law, which is totally different to endorsing the BRI. In fact, the BRI can be endorsed simply by a signature. And I think that's why it was very easy for the Panamanians to unendorse the BRI, because the document simply says that you need to notify the Beijing that you don't want to continue in that relationship. I have not seen the document of the BRI endorsement of Colombia. I've seen early drafts because Petro had one, I think the Chinese had one in their hands back in 2023 during their visit, partly because China has always been pushing forward for countries to join the BRI. But I think Brazil gives us a very good example that you don't have to endorse the BRI to be close to China. Lula is perhaps the president in the region that is the closest to China, yet Brazil has not endorsed the BRI for strategic reasons. And I think that there are many things that to be learned from that pragmatism of foreign policy forces within Brazil. So I think that that's an important issue. And of course, what the intentions of the countries, that what do they want when they get close to China via the BRICS or via the BRI need to be clear. Again, President Petro was discussing yesterday this interoceanic train, which I think is a little bit of a magic realism on his part, because that's not going to be possible, linking countries by a train through the sea. But maybe Petro has a special plan for that. I don't know. And I think that understanding needs to be improved. I think the domestic political issues are clear. I agree with Cynthia. You're right on that. Mostly to do with Russia, of course, the position on Ukraine, and also with the relationship with China. I think partly the reason why countries oftentimes move forward with this is because they need to sort of take a position, and countries are now being forced to do that. And the issue of China is now becoming more and more a domestic political issue. it was interesting in the elections in Paraguay, which, by the way, is one of the countries that has not established diplomatic ties with Beijing. During the election in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, the incumbent party stated that if people would vote for their party, they would stick with Taiwan. And the opposition party actually made a point of saying, if you vote for us, we will switch from Taipei to Beijing, which is also very interesting how China is playing an important role in domestic politics these days. And now the final point that Cynthia raised, which I think is also very important, is geopolitical challenges. There has been a fixation by Trump with Latin America. I think the first 100 days, he mentioned the word Latin America multiple times, including the Panama Canal in numerous occasions, alluding to the possibility of going back to Panama and take over the Panama Canal. So there is a lot of tension in that sense. The Panamanians, I think, handled the visit by Marco Rubio quite well, by simply conceding the fact that they were not going to endorse the BRI. Important to say that this fixation with the region is not new by Trump, by the way. Trump was fixated with the region during his first term. It just happens to be that people thought Trump was simply an anomaly in US politics. Mike Pompeo actually came to Panama during the first administration of Trump to warn countries from switching from Taiwan to Beijing. At the time, Juan Carlos Varela, president of Panama, told Mike Pompeo to, this is none of your business, basically. But I think now the situation is very different with Marco Rubio pushing his agenda, the U.S. agenda in the region, and of course with his visit to Panama, El Salvador, and the Dominican Republic, three of which countries have new diplomatic ties with China, which I think is also interesting. So I think this is important in terms of that geopolitical tensions that we'll see emerging, and countries have to maneuver things properly. And I think Bogota in particular has to be careful with this as they move forward, not to jeopardize their relationship with the U.S., which has been so important for for Colombian foreign policy over the years. Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. Thank you for your extensive and very informed response to Cynthia's excellent points. We have a number of questions from the audience, and maybe we'll turn to those next and give Cynthia an opportunity to respond to some of the questions, and maybe Alvaro as well, if you want to jump in. We have about 8 minutes left, and so let me just present some of the questions. So one of the questions being asked by the audience is, how do the BRICS, what's your view on how the BRICS, what's their relationship vis-a-vis the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank? Like, are they trying to counter, or are they supplemental is one way to think about it? Are they complementary, or are they against? And so that's one question. And the second question, of course, the NDB gives us something to think about concretely, as Alvaro was saying. There's a question about CAF, but maybe that's something I can take up also, and Alvaro can take up in the conclusion, because Alvaro Mendez and I are actually doing some work on CAF and looking at Asia and CAF. Very interesting. But Cynthia, you may have some thoughts. Yeah, why don't we start with those two, and then there's another question that I'll bring up from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro, for all those great comments, and thank you, Greg. I don't think that the BRICS were created to oppose Bretton Woods institution. If you look at their agenda, they were demanding a more equal participation within Bretton Woods institution. They were demanding more equal votes within the World Bank, within the IMF. It was not a completely opposing agenda to Bretton Woods institution. But I think right now it's a different moment, and it's still pretty early to evaluate that moment. But with all these inclusions, the agenda of the BRICS, they might change, because we have discussed here, and I was thinking about Alvaro's comment, right? We have a salad of acronyms and memberships. And one is BRICS full members, and that has increased within the last year. Then we have BRICS plus members, which has, I mean, it's a new sort of like condition to be as, I don't know, close to BRICS. And then we have the New Development Bank, which are three different things. And I mean, and those are like three different avenues to be part of like these BRICS. Can we call it coalition? Because it's not an international organization, as Alvaro was mentioning. So I don't think at the beginning the BRICS Plus were thought or were created with that agenda in mind. Right now, I think it's a different moment because China has been promoting, I mean, very increasingly, this idea of global South cooperation and global South within the international system. I mean, and this is quite, I would say, paradoxical. In some senses, China is supporting, I mean, the international, many of the characteristics of the international liberal order in response to what the US is doing, which, as we all know, has defected from many international organizations. I mean, when the first president of Trump and the second president of Trump. So I don't think it's opposing. I don't know much about CAF. I have to be honest. It's not my cup of tea. But we know that the New Development Bank was created looking at the CAF experience and has many different characteristics that overlaps with CAF, and they try somehow to copy the model of CAF. And I think the inclusion of more members will strengthen the New Development Bank. But so far, I mean, I have a couple of charts that I didn't have time to show, but if you compare, I mean, the New Development Bank loans with IMF and with World Bank, I mean, it's just a small piece and it's within only BRICS countries. So I think it would be a different situation if more countries join the New Development Bank and the New Development Bank start making loans outside BRICS countries more often. I think that would be a difference.
I would add to this. I mean, first of all, I think the question is a very good one. I do not think BRICS, the New Development Bank, or the AIB are beyond Bretton Woods, partly because there is only one system of creating multilateral development banks, which is the Bretton Woods system. And beyond what people might think about the NDB or the AIB, these two institutions actually have MOUs with the main Bretton Woods institutions, including the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the World Bank. So I think that's an interesting issue. What I think is very clear here is that the US has been against the idea from the very beginning, and we're not talking about Trump, we're talking about President Obama. Back in when he was pushing his US pivot to Asia against the idea of the NDB and also the AIB. Obama was massively surprised in 2015 when the British decided to join the AIB. They were taken totally by surprise because the US wanted the AIB to be a small institution similar to the NDB. But of course, with the European membership, that changed the dynamics completely. And when the British joined that, I think the expansion of the NDB is going to change that as well. Important to remember that the NDB operations get also rated in the international market. So they're also aware of that in terms of their cooperations. But there is no doubt that there is a Chinese flavor to it. Of course, the NDB is based in Shanghai, such as, of course, China has an important role to play, and the AIB based in Beijing. But I don't think they go beyond the Bretton Woods system. Perhaps one difference, especially in the AIB, is the fact that all countries could actually borrow money, unlike the World Bank, where you have donor countries versus borrowing countries. And I think that's interesting because some developed countries that are members of the AIB actually would need the funding for infrastructure. And I think you'll see the new members of the NDB, such as the UAE, I think would be very attractive to this idea.
Thank you to you both. Our time is running pretty close to end, but I'll just take the liberty of asking you one more question before we wrap up. And maybe you can give a short answer, whether you're pessimistic or more optimistic. can even be one-word answer. With all the trends and patterns that Cynthia addressed today and Alvaro, are you optimistic about Latin America's future, as a region from an integration standpoint, further integration, whether it be on intra-regional trade or geopolitical leverage within a world of great power contestation? As Latin America repositions, are you generally optimistic or more pessimistic? And then we'll wrap up. Cynthia and then Alvaro.
I am pessimistic, I have to say. Very pessimistic. Particularly, besides BRICS, particularly because it's very difficult for Latin American countries, South American countries to negotiate with China. And the big example, Alvaro mentioned that, is Brazil. But the rest of the countries, we are not Brazil. We don't have the capacities that Brazil has. So I think there's a lot of shifting in foreign policies, and Alvaro has a great paper on the shifting foreign policies, particularly addressing the case of Ecuador, right? It's unbelievable. Whenever government changes, they change the strategies of international insertion. So for example, and I would like to address Ecuador because it's the country I'm living right now, Ecuador sent a vice minister to the CELAC China summit yesterday, a vice minister that is telling you something, that the China-Ecuador relation is not a priority for this country anymore. And that doesn't make any sense because Ecuador has signed a free trade agreement with China a year ago that is just implemented. So if we keep on shifting policies and we don't have any regional organization in which we can think about the way, at least in which South American countries will relate to China and learn from each other, it's going to be a very asymmetric relation. It's going to continue to be a very symmetric relation. And we can't blame China on that. It's not China's priority to take account of the interests of the different South American countries. So I'm quite pessimistic, and particularly regionalism in Latin America has been facing, so many crises that it's very, very daunting, particularly in this scenario of geopolitical, problems.
Thank you for your heartfelt warning, Cynthia. And Alvaro, any thoughts before we wrap up?
Instead of being pessimistic, I would say I'm very critical. I think we need to have more clarity in what we want. Of course, I think Cynthia's absolutely right. Not all countries have the capacity that Brazil has in terms of foreign policy making, despite the fact that Brazil also makes a lot of decisions based on ideology, and Lula is betting on being reelected. And of course, we don't know if that's going to be the case, or his party in 2026. What I think is important is for countries in the region to realize that they don't have to choose between one over the other. When they approach the issue of China, they have to have clarity of what they want. I criticize Colombia. I'm Colombian, by the way. And I think sadly it's because I don't think Colombia knows what they want with China. And I think the countries that have endorsed the BRI don't really know what they're doing exactly, or how they're going to advance it. Now, on the multilateral development side, I think there are things to be gained. I think I see the membership of Uruguay in the NDB as a positive element. Because what we need in Latin America in order to have more integration is better infrastructure. And our infrastructure is really, really poor, and countries do not invest enough in that. But the issue here is that politicians keep putting things off, mañana, today, tomorrow, because the reality is that it's highly influenced by politics rather than pragmatism and strategy. And I think that's an issue that we're facing overall throughout the region by the countries that are having to decide between China and the U.S., which they shouldn't. They should have a more pragmatic approach and learn from others in the region that are a good example.
Thank you, Alvaro. That's very much appreciated. So today, I just want to say thank you so much, Cynthia, for your presentation. It was excellent. It's great to see you again. Right. Also, thank you to Alvaro, Dr. Mendez, for your response to Cynthia and the insight you shared also. I think this has been a great second session of the LSE Global South Dialogue. My colleagues at the LSE will also post this session online. So I welcome the audience, encourage the audience and our stakeholders to visit the LSE Ideas website and online and to watch the recording again. And I just would like to say thank you so much. Cynthia, great to see you again. And thank you, Alvaro. And look forward to seeing everyone again at our next third session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everyone for attending. Cynthia, Greg, a pleasure. Our students, thank you for participating. And please join us in the next one, which is in October.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.
Great summer, everyone.
Thank you, all the audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.